Hey reader, welcome back to the channel. This is Centaur here, and today we are taking a look at the tactical cards that might be of best use for you when running Stalkers. That's right, we're coming to the end of the Protoss core unit sort of choices. We'll be moving into Artanis, and hopefully by the time that launches, we'll have more information on the Immortal. So more on that here pretty soon, on the Protoss side of things, which is kind of cool. So coming through to the end on these. This is also going to mark the beginning of 2 weeks of us looking at Stalkers. We're going to be taking a look at small Stalkers later on this week. We're then going to have a video on Tuesday taking a look at should you take Stalkers as small units? Should you take them as large units? The Mathcraft videos by Cold Fury are very interesting on this, but I think there's probably a lot more that needs to be talked about because it's not so cut and dry and simple as purchasing two Stalkers as separate units is kind of the same as purchasing them as a single unit, but maybe with better surges and various and sundry other things, right? Like there's actually a lot more that needs to be talked about. So we're gonna have a whole video just discussing that in preparation for talking about the large Stalker unit. But just suffice it to say for now, the next week should be interesting for guys like me who, when I first started playing StarCraft 1, I loved the Dragoon. Had a lot of difficulty moving Dragoons, like we all did. But then when we come over to StarCraft 2, I was like, okay, it's kind of like the Dragoon, which is cool, but it has a little more utility and versatility, and I love that. And so as we get into Stalkers, I've intentionally been putting off Stalkers and Goliaths because I know I love these, and I wanted to make sure that I gave ample enough time to everything else that's in the game. I am excited that we're finally here heading into the next 2 weeks of Stalker weeks. And so when looking at the kinds of tactical cards you should be taking to make sure that you're getting the most out of your Stalkers, we need to first consider, as we always do, what do Stalkers actually need to be able to do? And I think perhaps most obviously, it's mobility, right? It's the big difference between Stalkers and Dragoons, which apparently is on the radar, right? Like they're on the horizon within the next couple of releases, which is crazy. I thought it was going to take a lot longer to get Dragoons. So I'm not going to lie, pumped. That's great. Give me some Colossi, and I got all the Walker boys I'm ever going to need, and that's all I'll ever need for Protoss. It's going to be great. But really, yeah, that mobility aspect, right? Being able to maneuver quickly to objectives, help to secure them, and be a real pain to get rid of. That's what Stalkers are designed to do. Okay, and so our tactical cards should be helping us to do that. Second, they do need to be able to deal damage, both because they are so mobile that they can easily end up on their own. So they need to be able to protect themselves by removing enemies. But also because currently with zealots, sentries, adepts, none of these are particularly great against armored targets. Artanis is fine. More on that when we talk about Artanis. But Artanis is relatively limited in terms of his ability to actually chop through and remove armored units very quickly. Stalkers can potentially help to fill that void, which is really nice. And so, because of that, anything that can help them to do more reliable damage, to do the job for us so that we can protect the rest of our army against serious armored threats, all of this is positive. Durability is also important. We need units who can hold objectives for a really long time, especially since before the release of the Immortal, okay, because this video is being recorded before Immortals have come out. This is the durable unit we have, other than Artanis. Artanis is fantastic too. If you use him right, if you don't use him right, you might be like, oh, this guy sucks for his cost. I get that. You might be better buying a unit of Stalkers, okay? But if you use Artanis right, he's a great tank, but these guys are just always good tanks for a lot of reasons, which we're going to talk about in this video. But just suffice it to say, this means if we need somebody to actually hold an objective for us, we might need to put the Stalkers in that place, okay? And then finally, they're useful for air defense. And for a little while, this is going to be our option for air defense, right? Until the Scout arrives with the Flyer Wave. I don't anticipate anybody being particularly good at taking on air units nearly as well as Stalkers are. And with the Raven arriving as early as the next support, boost, so Wave 3, I think, we're going to need air defense down the line. So better get used to how you run these so that you'll have them around in case you have to fight back against air units. And so, with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about faction choice. I think you can go Daelon or Kalai. I tend to find Kalai tends to be slightly more useful for Stalkers for a couple reasons. First is that with the Pylon Warp in, you get a little more freedom of deployment, right? Where you can, call it in round one, you can place down the pylon, and then starting in round two, you can then start deploying units from the pylon as an entry edge. The bases of the pylon become an entry edge, which means that if you deploy a stalker in base contact and then move them out, that could be A blink you don't need to use, right? It could be a blink and a warp prism additional phase action that you don't need to use, which means you could save yourself a lot of psionic energy over the course of a game by how many tap a tactical card for psionic energy in order to utilize a movement ability just by taking this pylon. Okay, now pylon has to survive. That is a question as to whether or not it will. Do you want your stalkers out earlier so you can take advantage of their abilities as early as as round one instead of round two? That is a legitimate question. Okay, but at the very least, it does open up options. In addition to that, the pylon itself is also extremely helpful because there are quite a few very nice bonuses for the stalker. They do sometimes require psionic energy, whether that's blink, so that way you can, easily move to another place, potentially trigger a heal off of something like a Twilight Council. Whether it's the one that makes them hidden, Path of Shadows, that makes them hidden. These things require psionic energy, and while stalkers don't require a lot of psionic energy, they can. And the result is being near the pylon allows you once per round to reduce the amount of psionic energy required by that unit when it's activating by one. Which, across your entire army, minus one psionic energy used every round isn't like amazing, but it isn't nothing. And it could be the difference between having a gateway to tap for precision 2 in close combat, or it could be the difference between tapping in an observer in order to reveal hidden units. There's a lot of stuff that you might be thinking, well, I can spend this because I probably won't need it. And the next thing you know, you need it, right? And so anything that can just make it so we can use the abilities on our cards instead of just the psionic energy on our cards is very good. Okay. Moving 2 units in a single activation with Bound by the Kala can also be really good. Now, I find this ironic because my understanding is that stalkers are supposed to be from the Nerazim. The Nerazim are not connected to the Kala. They cut their nerve cords. Thematically, I don't know how this works. Call it they work really well as a team. Wolf pack training, right? The concept is cool. I don't see a reason why we should, take the Nerazim out of being able to use this, other than obviously the fact that if you're running the Nerazim faction card, you won't be running the Kalai faction card, which means you will not get this ability, but you get the point, right? Like being able to activate one of your units and then activate another one of your friendly units right after that means you're passing earlier, which means you have a much better chance of going first in the assault phase. There are ways to gimmick you out of that. You might end up running up against an enemy who's like, I'm actually pretty happy with where all my units are. I'm just going to pass early because I don't want to charge first, or I want to shoot first, or something like that. Okay, that might still happen, but it at least increases your chances, right? Which is good. And to be clear, Dalam is also really good. And I imagine when we see Nerazim is also going to be really good. I'm planning on painting up my Protoss in a Nerazim scheme because I think I'm really going to like it. But the Kalai does allow you to have kind of more reliable initiative in the assault phase, which for a heavily range-focused unit that does not have particularly good close combat abilities, that is huge. So while I run both, I'm favoring Kalai if I'm running heavy stalkers. Now, in terms of an honorable mention, I'm going to talk about the Warp Gate. Okay, the Warp Gate did not make my top 5, mostly because it's kind of doing what Blink is already doing. So there's a legitimate question of, do you really need this for stalkers? Now, I think it's like a top choice for almost everything else Protoss related. But at the very least, I'm not sure you need it necessarily for stalkers. Okay. One, because stalkers already do movement pretty well. So the movement ability coming in from a non-player entry edge is really, is kind of superfluous. Could be helpful, could save you some psionic energy over the course of a game. Again, kind of similar to the pylon. So in that sense, I think it's worth noting, it's worth mentioning. And if you are choosing to take this in your army, I think you've made a good choice. I take a warp gate 9 times out of 10. I guess that makes me a cheese player. However, it is worth noting that really the biggest bonus you're probably going to get from stalkers off of this is the quick strikes ability by taking an objectively horrible close combat attack and making it slightly more reliable because it will turn misses into hits. Okay? It turns 2 misses into hits, which means if you miss a lot, congratulations, you're getting at least 2 hits. Okay? However, you can obviously do that for cheaper, okay, by taking a standard gateway for 25 gas instead of 40 gas. Okay? Is it better to do this? The other thing, too, is that while technically it can save you blinks, sometimes you may want to use blink so that you can tap a Twilight Council to heal, too. right? And so it may not actually save you that many blinks over the course of a game. So while I think it's a good idea to include one, and I include one a lot of the time, I'm honest about the fact this is probably not what I'm using with my stalkers. The other big issue too is that by the way it's worded, it says that the controlling player cannot use this ability if another friendly ground unit has already deployed, which means this has to be your first unit you deploy in the round if you want to use that warp in ability. And if that's the case, your opponent's gonna know where your armored, not very good in close combat unit is first. And they now get to plan where they deploy their Marauders, their Hydralisks, their Zerglings with Shredding Claws, heck, their Zealots, right? They get to know where it is before they end up deploying their units. And I think, personally, that that's not advantageous for Stalkers. Okay, it could be a nice bump, potentially. So I include it here as an honorable mention. But you probably want this with something else. Now, at number 5, and this might strike you as a little bit surprising, we have the Nexus. Okay, the Nexus is nice. Ancient Pride, giving your weapon instant, in case you're newer to Starcraft TMG. The instant keyword means that the opponent cannot react to this with reaction abilities, which is important because every damage mitigation ability is a reaction ability. Most healing abilities that people have are reaction abilities of some kind. So, if you want to, if somebody has medics protecting their Stimpacked Marines or Stimpacked Marauders, it is true that instant is a nice tool to say, well, the medics won't be able to block any of these wounds with their healing abilities. So everything's getting through, and I surge against you, and I do 2 damage each, which means my ability to pop and remove a model, if not a lot of models, is actually quite high. And that is good. In addition to that, the recall ability is also not horrible because if, let's say, that you push the opponent completely off of an objective, take and secure the objective, you leave a sentry unit over there, you're like, okay, now I guess I get to walk my stalkers across the battlefield and they get pounded by everything along the way to get to the next objective. One can do that and it's perfectly fine. The benefit of strategic recall is you can then decide on, say, round 2, okay, I'm going to pull this thing back to reserves instead of performing an action. Drop it back. And then on round 3, you could then deploy it out on one of your other entry edges, which could even be the pylon, right? In a completely different part of the map. And the benefit of pulling it back and bumping it back to reserves is they can't shoot at it, right? They can't wound this thing, which is extremely difficult to get rid of. It's not a particularly squishy unit against most enemies in the game currently. The result is that that could be the difference between winning and losing. You can even speed it up a bit. It's technically a way to be able to get it in round 2. Not particularly quick, but you can do this. You can bump it out on its turn and strategic recall it back into reserves. And then when you activate your next unit, or even a unit before that if you want to, you can use a warp prism to drop down a token somewhere on the battlefield. And then at the end of the round, you get to place a unit in reserves. It doesn't say a unit that wasn't brought into reserves this turn, just any unit that's in reserves. And you can then put it down in base contact with the token. At which point, as long as you have enough supply available, your maximum supply is enough to be able to deploy the stalker back in, or stalkers if you take the larger squad. You can do that. At which point, they technically lose 1 turn, but they get really fast, really aggressive, very excellent movement on that turn. And then they're ready to go hit the ground running right at the beginning of round 3. You don't have to move them on from anywhere. You're not worried about whether or not they're in range. They're right in the thick of it as needed. Biggest issue, of course, with this is that with Fury of the Nerazim, you can spend 40 minerals to give yourself instant on all of your attacks without having to tap a card, as long as the target unit has already activated. Which means it's not the greatest thing if you want to lead off with that unit. Again, we're going to talk about this more when we do the unit reviews and stuff like that. But this is, I generally tend to think Fury of the Nerazim is worth it. One, because I tend to find that minerals tend to be a slightly less scarce resource than gas. So if I'm going to be spending gas, I might want to either pass on a Nexus and take something else in order to free up the 35 gas worth of gas for other stuff. Or I might want to save this for my Zealots, so that when my Zealots attack stuff, medics aren't plucking away a whole bunch of the wounds I might potentially be doing, right? So in general, I tend to think I'm going to save this. The other big issue, of course, is that if it's worth running one stalker, it's worth running typically multiple stalkers, sometimes multiple units. And the problem with Nexus is it is a unique card, which means if you don't take Fury of the Nerazim on your stuff, you're limited to one of your stalker units getting access to instant. And I think that's fine I don't think it's great, which is why the Nexus is at number 5. Fantastic card. I take this quite a bit, especially in standard games. But I'm not sure it's necessarily the best if you're leaning into Stalkers. Number 4, and this might surprise people because of some of the cool shenanigans you can do with this that we have talked about in the past, is the Warp Prism. Okay, now the Warp Prism allows for two things. First of all, you get a place 3 effect, okay, which is a relatively short place, but it is a movement and it is a place, and then you do get a regroup on top of that. Okay, and then the second one is the ability, as we were talking about just before with the Nexus talk, where you get to place out a token beyond 10 inches of an enemy model, and at the end of the round, you can deploy a ground unit from reserves and base space contact with the faction indicator. Now, it's worth noting if you get to deploy first on round 1, if you deploy literally any unit and then you warp conduit, there are no enemy units on the battlefield, which means you can literally place that token anywhere you want. Even if an opponent moves within 10 inches, the only requirement on the faction indicator is that you have to set a faction indicator anywhere on the battlefield more than 10 inches away from an enemy model. There's no requirement that it remain beyond 10 inches of an enemy model, which means this could be a great way to just quickly get some stalkers up somewhere to contest an objective that your opponent thought was safe. Extremely safe. That might be dangerous to the stalker's health, so you might want to maybe tap a unit, bring them in with a warp gate, call it a unit of zealots, bring them on near that area, and then tap your warp prism and drop a faction token next to it, and then you can have stalkers supporting your zealots, which is really powerful. Okay. Keep in mind, stalkers won't arrive until the end of the round, so Zealot's going to have to be okay for that first round all by themselves. But you can do this. There is a lot of utility to this, and that's part of why it makes the list. There's a couple of problems here, though. Okay, the first is that the place 3 effect is great. Don't get me wrong, because it's basically an extra. You place 3, and then you've got your base, which is 80 millimeters. So it's a little over 3 inches. So you're getting about 6 inches worth of movement. You get even more than that if you end up getting what's it called? You get even more than that if you end up getting a large squad, and so then you get to place 4 inches even further out because of your unit cohesion. And that's, again, very useful for crossing the battlefield, especially since you can queue up this Warp Prism alongside Blink. So you could potentially move your standard move, and then you could tap Blink to blink 6 inches with one, and then leapfrog another 4 inches with the second one. And then you can place 3. Then you can tap the Warp Prism because there's no limit on how many of these active ability cards you can use to place another 3, and then leapfrog another 4. You can cover over 20 inches in a single turn, which is crazy. I do wonder how necessary it is. It's just gravy. And gravy doesn't tend to make me think it's an absolute necessity. Okay. Useful, very useful. When you're at lower points levels, you probably don't need this because you have Blink. At higher points levels, can be extremely useful, especially since the battlefield is getting longer. Okay. Useful card. Not sure it's absolutely necessary. And losing an entire turn with Stalkers can kind of hurt because depending on how you build them out, they can be quite expensive. And you really don't want to be losing that value on the table. At number 3, we have Power Field. This one doesn't come up all that much, but it is extremely useful in things that have a really good armor save. So more on that probably when we take a look at the Immortal. Purely from the article that we read about, it's supposed to be really good on defense, which holds up. That's why it's called an Immortal. I imagine Power Field will be very useful on that one as well. But the way the Guardian Shell works is that as a reaction, you gain Dodge 2 before making an armor roll. Now, this is actually a really important set of order of operations. Okay, the opponent has declared an attack against your unit. You do not need to react with Power Field. They then roll to hit against your unit. You still don't have to declare Power Field. You get to look at how they did on their hits. And then they roll for Surge to see how many of those go through. You still don't have to declare Power Field. You can then see how many of them have surged, how many have been affected by critical hit. And then what happens is then you move to the armor roll. And before you make your armor roll, you then decide, do I want to use Power Field or do I not? And the way that Dodge works is it takes up to 2 of those dice that were surged through or critical hit through, anything that would bypass the armor roll, and it throws them back into the armor roll. And while that doesn't sound great because it's not like the tough special rule, which is just you take things that are in the pool and you remove them. It's an automatic success, right? Effectively on your armor save. What this does do is it does mean that, especially if you're going up against things that have a Pierce Armor 2 or a standard damage of 2 or a Pierce Armor 3, which does exist quite extensively within even these first few waves that we've gotten of units, Any of those that you block on your 4 plus, and if you're throwing back in 2, on average, you're going to block 1. That's 2 to 3 damage, possibly more, because obviously we haven't seen Ultralisks yet, right? We haven't seen some of the really big stuff yet. Uh, this could be huge, right? In terms of how much damage you're actually blocking against your Stalker. And when you compare it to things like Daylom, which is blocking up to a maximum of 3, but still requiring a minimum of 1 wound, um, and when you compare that to Forge, which is just blocking 1 single dice, while yes, on average, if you throw 2 of them back into a 4 plus armor save, you're only going to block 1, your ceiling is 2, in which case you could be blocking 2 hits, which is better than Tough 1, which is currently the best that you get with any of the Protoss units we have, certainly with Stalkers. And it could potentially be blocking 6 or more wounds instead of like 2 to 3 in the case of Daylon. So, just in general, I tend to find that is an extremely useful ability, and it can keep your Stalkers alive for an insanely long period of time, especially if their plan was just, well, I've got this small squad of Marauders, and his job is to handle Stalkers. That's his job. Fine idea. They might not actually do as much damage as they think they do, and he might be doing a whole lot more damage to them, especially if they don't get the benefit of medics. Okay. It also does give you an elite slot, and elite slots are relatively hard to come by for Protoss right now. So since you need those to run Stalkers, kind of nice. Kind of nice. And have whereas the other ones that we've had so far, they give you core slots, which is nice. They don't give you any elite slots. Now, in looking at number 2, we have the Forge. This gives us elite slots, which are really nice. And more than that, it gives us a non-unique card that gives us elite slots. So if you want to run a lot of Stalkers, this is one of the most cost-efficient ways to be able to do it from a gas perspective, which is really nice. But it also gives us 2 very simple abilities that we're very familiar with from other units. So we have a reaction ability with ground armor, where again, same timing, it's right before you make an armor roll. You can gain tough 1 for this roll. Now it's worth noting the way that reactions work, a unit can perform 1 reaction per activation, which means if you use Guardian Shell, you cannot then follow up with a Forge. Okay? So you're going to have to choose between the 2. But in my opinion, a guaranteed tough 1 of them saves, is a really nice ability, and it is good to have. Second thing we're thinking about is that if you have active abilities, like the ground weapons ability, the ability to just give yourself critical hit 1 on a ranged weapon. So again, this doesn't really work with Zealots. It doesn't really work with Praetor Guard or anything like that. But it does work with Stalkers. Critical hit 1 is just you get to effectively surge something through, but against anything, right? It doesn't matter whether it's light, whether it's armored, or anything else like that. It also means this is the only way to bypass a hit past the armor save of a hero character, because heroes are neither light nor armored, which means nothing surges against them. The only way to sneak things through is with critical hit. And if you already have Surge Armor D3, which these guys have, having a D3 plus 1 effectively, where on average you're getting through 3 hits, you're getting 2 to 4, minimum of 2, maximum of 4, that just bypass something's armor save. And each of those hits, if they don't block them with an evade save, of which armored targets don't tend to be particularly good at evade saves, unless they're like burrowed Zerg Swarm roaches, each of those is doing 2 wounds. That could be game over, right? Just having an extra plus 1 thing surging through. They don't get a chance to block it. This could be huge for you. But in addition, if you have to take on light targets, being able to say, okay, well, one of your armor saves doesn't work, right? Now you got to rely on an evade save, which maybe they get, maybe they don't. This could be another 2 damage happening to light targets, which could be 1 or even more units removed from the opponent, which is really, really nice. So just in general, I tend to find Forge is great just because it allows you to run Mass Stalker, which is really good. And we're going to talk about that more in the next couple of weeks. I'm waiting until after the Immortal drops because I'm hoping it's going to come with the robotics facility. And if it comes with the robo facility, then that might be something worth considering for a Mass Stalker video. So I'm intentionally waiting on that. We're going to keep giving it a little bit more time. But this is I think one of the best cards you could be running. When in doubt, go with Fortress. And again, the nice thing too is again, it's pretty useful for basically everything in your list. So it is quite nice. But there's only one card that I think is a better fit for Stalkers than any we've talked about so far, and it's not particularly surprising because it's the one we use in the game with Stalkers all the time, other than a Cybernetics core, which again we still haven't seen yet. And that is the Twilight Council. Okay? The Twilight Council gives an elite slot, which is really nice. It gives a support slot, which is not strictly as necessary, but it could be useful in the future. More on that in future video. The big thing that it gives us is it gives us an offensive ability and a defensive ability, both of which are excellent, and both of which are very easy for stalkers to take advantage of. The first is Veil of Shadows, where, after a friendly unit, like a stalker, resolves a place effect, like Blink, which comes free on the unit. You've already bought it. The unit immediately resolves the Heal 2 effect. Now, they have clarified healing doesn't affect shields. Can't get your shields back. However, if you're the durable unit that's supposed to hold an objective and you can just blink an inch, right? Or something like that. Just blink an inch, right? Still stay within scoring range of the objective, very important. And now you heal up two of the wounds that the opponent worked really, really hard to get. And you just get rid of them. It's annoying. Okay, I'm gonna be honest. Especially if you've been doing Guardian Shell and then you're doing forges when they're actually attacking you. Then on the following turn, if they just blink as part of the new movement phase, we've reset, you think you've almost got them, and they just blink and then they heal. It's just like, oh my gosh, dude! Like it's annoying. It's very annoying, but highly effective. And again, if you have the durable unit and you want to keep it alive longer, that is a really good thing to do. But in addition, it has weapons of the firstborn, and the way that this is worded is actually really important. It takes a ranged weapon and it gives it the buff range 4 ability, which means that one, since this is the assault phase, you can declare this at the start of their activation when you're already ready to shoot. You don't have to declare this in the movement phase where the opponent can then plan on, okay, I'm going to move, 17 inches away from them. So that way their normal 12-inch range plus a potential 4 off of a Twilight Council will be out of range. You just move in the movement phase and they got to assume maybe they use it, maybe they don't. They got to start making decisions. And if they move too far, you start your assault phase and, there you go. Now you decide, do I want to use weapons of the firstborn or do I not, right? The second and important thing about this is a lot of people sleep on the medic's flare ability, which can reduce, it can debuff range on the target and it prevents them from using long range as a means of being able to hit stuff. You will notice by the wording of weapons of the firstborn, this is not the long range keyword. This is a straight buff range 4, which means one, you can still use weapons of the firstborn when you are still, under the effects of a flare. But two, it's enough to remove the penalty. So if you maneuvered your unit into range of an opponent so that you would have sufficient range to be able to hit them, and they try to gimmick you out of your shot, you can Uno reverse and say, no, you. You spent 2 of your command points in order to get this bonus. Maybe 1 if they tapped the ability on the academy, right? But you spent effectively 2 energy resources in order to make this happen. I'm going to spend 1 resource to cancel out what you did, and I'm still going to get what I wanted. That is an extremely useful ability. And so if you need them to be able to do defense and hold for you, Twilight Council. If you need them to be able to do offense for you, Twilight Council. Maybe accompanied with a Forge in both cases. But I think if you're thinking, okay, I'm going to run it, 40 gas feels like a lot, may I recommend to you Twilight Council? It's worth getting. But what do you think? Did I leave something out? Did I sleep on your chrono boosted gateway because reasons? Is the extra 2 inches actually worth considering when it comes to this? I felt like since I was already talking about so much work with Blink and with, warp gates and warp prisms and stuff like that, I didn't personally feel like the chrono boosted gateway was quite as useful as those. But maybe it is. Was there another card that I left out that you think should absolutely make the list? Let us know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.